13 billion years before the events of the Skywalker Saga, the universe sprung into existence in an event known as the Big Bang. The universe was extraordinarily hot, but gradually cooled as it expanded into the void of nothingness. Stars and galaxies began to form out of the cosmic inferno, and eventually the first planets appeared. As time passed, the planets cooled. The seas of lava were replaced with nourishing seas of water. The poisonous clouds evaporated away, leaving behind life-giving oxygen. Around 7 billion years after the dawn of time, deep within the Galactic Core, the first life forms developed, known as Midi-Chlorians. Under the influence of the Force, the Midi-Chlorians spread across the galaxy, seeding the first forms of primitive life. However, it took almost another 5 billion years for the first sentient beings to arrive in the galaxy, with the Wookiees being some of the earliest known species to gain sentience. Civilizations that have long been lost to history began to thrive around 1 million years before the Battle of Yavin, with one species on the planet of Geralik building vast ancient cities before going extinct when apocalyptic floods engulfed this ancient civilization. Elsewhere, on the planet of Neutron, two species gained sentience around the same time. These two species would go on to shape the course of galactic history. However, 200,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the tribal ancestors of the Mandalorians, the Tang, and the primitive ancestors of humanity, the Zell, were locked in a perpetual war for dominance over the planet. During this interspecies war, a supervolcano would erupt, and the Tang developed a warrior-like culture, naming themselves the Word of Verda, or Warriors of the Shadow. The Tang believed that the volcanic eruption had been a foreshadowing of their destiny as rulers of Neutron. However, the Tang's destiny resided elsewhere, and the Zell eventually drove them from the planet. Many of their priestess caste would flee to the unknown regions, where they formed a dark side cult. However, the large majority of the Tang travelled to the barren moon world of Rune, and here they would fade into obscurity for almost 200,000 years, until the ascendance of their first great king, Mandalore I. With the Zell now defeated, the 13 nations of Zell united Neutron, and an era of peace enveloped the planet, with the brutal warriors of the Zell slowly evolving into modern humans. However, at this point in time, the Tang's and humanity's importance in the galaxy were rather minuscule. Although their story would one day grow in significance, the history of the early galaxy would be shaped by beings of godlike power, an advanced species long forgotten by the time of the Republic. Around 100,000 BBY, various species reached the zenith of their power, and between them held the majority of influence over the galaxy. First, a race of tall white-haired beings known as the Sharu expanded outward from the Rafa system towards the core worlds, building vast and indestructible pyramids and experimenting with extra-dimensional technology. Another species known as the Gree would also begin exploring the stars and made huge strides in developing some of the most advanced technology ever seen in the galaxy. At their peak, they had mastered quantum, dimensional, and stellar engineering, as well as creating some of the only fully self-aware artificial intelligences. The Gree competed for dominance with another advanced race native to the planet of Dathomir, known as the Quar. They specialized in the creation of hypergates and star temples, with the Quar carving out an empire in the Outer Rim known as the Quar Holdings. Other species such as the Colomai explored the galaxy, but became bored of only ever meeting primitive species such as humans, and instead decided to retreat back to their homeworld. However, these mere mortal beings were not alone in the universe. Far greater powers beyond the comprehension of the early inhabitants of the galaxy would soon make themselves known. Around the time that sentient mortals developed and began expanding throughout the galaxy, immortal beings of immense power began to take an active role in shaping early civilization. These beings would one day become known as the Celestials, and their origins are shrouded in deep mystery. Some claim they are among the earliest species to evolve, whose deep connection to the Force and advanced technology allowed them to merge themselves with the Force itself, becoming what would be known as the Will of the Force. Many of the earliest civilizations were theorized to have been guided by them, with many of these ancient societies depicting vines, tentacles, and serpents in their artwork that were likely meant to represent the Celestials. Even the powerful Sharu were known to have depicted starfish-like beings that they claimed had created them. Other species, such as the hive mind of the Killiks, claimed they remember seeing the Celestials erupting from a volcano 1 million years before the Clone Wars, although how true this actually is very much up to debate. The Celestials pushed forward into the stars, coming into contact with many other species in various states of advancement. The Gree and Qua became client species of the Celestials, while other species such as the Colomai retreated completely from the stars in fear. The Sharu went even further and used their advanced technology to strip themselves of their intelligence and hide their immense cities underground. The Celestials embarked on an era of stellar engineering unlike the galaxy had ever seen before. Around this time, the Ones rose to prominence. Their relation to the Celestials is not exactly known. Perhaps they were the embodiment of the Celestials and the Force, or possibly they were simply an exceptionally powerful family of Celestials. It is known that the relationship between the son and the daughter had a profound impact on shaping the will of the Force, with the daughter representing the light and the son the dark. The father embodied the balance between the two and used his power to ensure that neither one became too powerful, although his efforts to prevent conflict were often in vain. This was until a young servant girl began caring for the Ones on an unknown jungle world, catering for their every need and doting upon them. Although she was a mere mortal, she would in time become a vital part of the family, and integral to keeping the peace between the son and the daughter. She taught the son to use his destructive powers for good, and the son and the daughter worked together to restore their home. Eventually, she became so integral to the Ones that she became known as the Mother. However, this time of peace was not to last. The servant girl soon aged into an old woman, and she could no longer control her warring children. She began to fear death, and feared that her family would abandon her in her old age. In a desperate bid to gain eternal life, she planned on committing the forbidden. When the father was distracted by his arguing children, she bathed in the pool of knowledge and drank from the font of power. However, this immense power was too much for her mortal mind to bear, and she was transformed into Abeloth, the bringer of chaos and queen of the stars. With her mind and body now twisted by the full power of the Force, she used her powers to dominate the son and the daughter. The father then stepped in and evacuated his children from the planet. Now abandoned, Abeloth's greatest fear had now been fulfilled. She was driven to the point of insanity and held a deep desire to be adored and worshipped. Realizing the threat she now posed to the galaxy, the son and the daughter enslaved the hive mind of the Killiks. They used their powers to imbue them with the Force, and this new workforce flew around the solar system without need for propulsion or protective equipment. The Killiks were tasked with mining asteroids and building gargantuan structures known as Centerpoint and Sinkhole Station. These stations were truly immense, and could be used to drag entire star systems and black holes through hyperspace with very little effort. The Ones used the stations to create the Maw cluster of black holes around Abeloth's planet, preventing her from escaping and wreaking havoc upon the wider galaxy. In addition to the Maw, the Celestials embarked on various other stellar engineering projects, including the creation of the Cathol Rift and the Volga system. Most notably, the Celestials used Centerpoint Station to create the Corellian system. The Corellian system was to be the final resting place of Centerpoint Station, and it would remain there for the rest of galactic history. After this, the Celestials withdrew to Mortis, only ever taking an active role in the galaxy if Abeloth escaped her prison, as she would periodically every few thousand years. However, the Celestials' climb races continued to expand outward to more primitive worlds, expanding their minds with the Force and gifting them with advanced technology. Around 90,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, humanity began rapidly advancing, possibly due to interference by the Gree. Humanity built its first worldwide Eucomenopolis on Neutron, covering the entire planet in cities and industrial districts. From space, the planet was said to flicker and glow like a rare stone known as Coruscant gems, and so Neutron became known as Coruscant. For the next 54,000 years, little changed in the galaxy. The majority of this era was characterized by peace, watched over by various celestial client species, although the majority of records in this era have been lost to history. However, around 36,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the history of the galaxy would veer off in a dark and violent direction. Under the direction of the Celestials, the Quar visited a primitive but highly force-sensitive race on the planet Lehorn. The Quar gifted this race, the RAKATA, with advanced force technology, as they had done with many other species before them. To the Quar's horror, this primitive race were cannibalistic and only drew upon the dark side of the Force. The RAKATA used their new technology to wage war upon neighbouring systems, with a brutality that has seldomly been seen before or since. After the Quar refused to gift them with infinity gates that allowed instantaneous travel across the galaxy, the RAKATA turned on their benefactors. Many Quar perished destroying the infinity gates to prevent them from falling into the hands of the RAKATA. Now calling themselves the Infinite Empire, the RAKATA conquered many force-rich worlds, enslaving their populations and placing force sensitives in machines to harvest their dark energies for their technology. Their greatest technological terror, however, was the Star Forge. This behemoth utilized the dark side of the Force and the mass of a star to manufacture an unlimited army of droids, ships, and weaponry. While the details have long been lost, it is generally accepted that the RAKATA soon unleashed their dark side weapons on the galaxy and waged war upon the Celestials. The Gree record stated that the RAKATA, known to them as the Soul Hunters, released curses upon the Celestials, including the Grey Swallowing and the Faceless Mouths, although exactly what they were is no longer known. Soon after, the Celestials disappeared from the galaxy, with some theorizing that they had retracted into the Force itself. Following this, the reign of the RAKATA began. The few Quar left on the deep core world of Tython died out at this time, and the Quar as a whole fled in terror to their homeworld of Dathomir. When the RAKATA eventually arrived on Dathomir, they mercilessly conquered the planet. Due to the RAKATans' brutality, the Quar gradually devolved into the dim-witted Quee lizards. The Infinite Empire also drove the Gree all the way back to their home cluster. The Infinite Empire used stasis technology to encase monsters, warlords, and other powerful beings on the planet Belsavis, turning it into a prison world. One such creature was known as the World Razor, a strange creature whose appetite was said to have consumed 1,000 worlds. It took the entire Infinite Empire to subjugate the World Razor, and it is said if it was ever released, it had the potential to destroy the entire galaxy. However, while destruction, subjugation, and the dark side ruled supreme over the galaxy, there was still some hope. All this would change with the rise of two very important groups, the Ancient Sith and the Jedi. This part of the Star Wars story begins in 36,000 BBY, when mysterious Force-sensitive ships known as the Tho-Yor began collecting Force-sensitive beings from across the galaxy. Their origins are not exactly known, but it is likely that they were created by the Quar or possibly even by the Celestials themselves. The 8 Tho-Yor came together in the year 36,000 BBY in a star system with 11 uninhabited planets. When all 8 Tho-Yor had gathered around the largest ship, the planet received them with a tremendous force storm, which saw the planet's raw force energy burst in the form of powerful lightning and groundquakes. The passengers of these ships were able to sense the force around them and were brought together as a single people. The Pilgrims founded the Jedi Order, borrowing their name from the Dai Bendu monk species, which combined the words Ji, meaning mystical, and Dai, which means center. To guide them in their quest to find balance in the Force, the Jedi adopted the following code. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no fear, there is power. I am the heart of the Force. I am the revealing fire of light. I am the mystery of darkness, in balance with chaos and harmony, immortal in the Force. Throughout the Order's existence, the Tho-Yor remained enigmatic, with the Jedi pondering the deep mystery of where they came from and what mission they truly served. However, this time of tranquility was not to last. The Jedi began to have children that were not Force sensitive, and it became evident to the Tithans that the planet was not safe for those who could not touch the Force. After the city of Aurum was destroyed by one of Tithans' violent Force storms, a massive relocation occurred. All Tithans who were not Force sensitive were forced to abandon the planet, even if it meant splitting up families. The non-Force sensitives settled first on Tithans' moons, Ashlar and Bogan, before proliferating out to other worlds within the star system. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the dark side reigned supreme, as the RAKATA expanded into territory previously held by the Celestials and their client races. The Infinite Empire had reached its peak by 30,000 BBY. The holdings of the once Great Kwa and Gree empires had now been fully absorbed into the RAKATAn Infinite Empire and their populations subjugated. However, independent worlds did still exist. This included the Jedi, the hive-minded Killiks, and an aggressive species known as the Sith. Sith civilization arose on the world of Korriban. They led barbaric lives while employing the dark side of the Force. The Sith and the dark side had a natural symbiosis, and they thrived off one another. However, these Sith were unlike the Sith of later years. Although they were nasty brutes, they considered self-sacrifice to be noble, a trait that would later disappear over the millennia. Despite their immense power, the Sith lived in tribal circles, led by one or more Sith sorcerers who were responsible for their people's safety and well-being. The prevalence of violence among the Sith kingdoms on Korriban was frequent in their culture, but the Sith people viewed it as equally important as peace and tranquility. Despite their dark side tendencies and beliefs, Athoyu arrived on Korriban around 36,000 BBY, and the best and most talented Force sensitives of their race departed to Tython and actually helped found the Jedi Order. After the Celestials' empire crumbled, the Sith would experience some of the side effects of their demise. The Killiks, former slaves of the Celestials, would attempt to subjugate the Sith. However, demonstrating their great power, the Sith drove off the invasion. This pushed them further to the dark side and greatly increased their xenophobia. Civil war continued among the Sith nations on Korriban for another 2,000 years, but the planet was eventually unified under the reign of a single Sith, King Adas. Due to the unusual characteristics of his charcoal-coloured skin, Adas was nurtured as a chosen being, and he developed into a formidable Sith Lord. Adas had a special skill for Sith magic, with the whole of Korriban unified under his command in approximately 28,000 BBY. In honour of this accomplishment, he earned the title Sithari, meaning perfect being in the Sith language. When the Darkside conquerors of the RAKATAn Infinite Empire landed on Korriban, Adas had been governing for almost 300 years. The RAKATans attempted to lure Adas into trusting the RAKATans by offering the Sith new technology such as holocrons. Ultimately, however, the RAKATans attempted to subjugate the Sith people. Despite the advanced weaponry of the RAKATA, Adas managed to outsmart the immensely powerful Infinite Empire, eventually defeating the invaders. After this, he assumed command of the RAKATan hyperspace vessels, and expanded his Sith Empire to adjacent systems. However, in order to guarantee liberty for his people, Adas was eventually forced to give up his life. These wars left the Sith stronger but embittered, and very distrustful of other species. The RAKATans, however, had not only supplied the Sith with new technologies, but also brought the Sith into play with the idea of the dark side of the Force as a concept. This collided with their idea of self-sacrifice for the greater good, and their gods, radically changing their society and galactic history. Around the time the Sith were driving off the RAKATA, the Killiks would vanish from their homeworld of Alderaan and the galaxy at large. It is believed that this was one of the last times that the Celestials majorly interfered in the galaxy. In the core, the RAKATA captured several worlds, including the planet Coruscant, home to the humans. However, despite their RAKATan subjugation, humanity began to test sleeper ships, colonizing several planets in the core worlds and the Tion cluster. Although their power was still mighty, the Infinite Empire was not what it once was, and they found themselves overstretched. the Eshkar species started to overcome a number of enslaved planets, which led to the Infinite Empire having to strike back at the Eshkar. The response was rapid and overwhelming, and eventually all the Eshkar were locked up in the stasis vaults in Belsavis. However, this would not be the only uprising. 25,800 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Kumunga people had built an advanced civilization on their lush jungle planet of Tatooine. However, soon after they reached out to the stars, the RAKATA found them and enslaved the planet. They eventually rebelled and were punished by the RAKATA, who bombed and destroyed the surface of Tatooine's once luxurious world, turning it into nothing more than a shard of fused glass. Due to the catastrophic climate change induced by the RAKATA, the Kumunga split into two distinct races, the Sand People and the Jawas. If you want to find out more about Tatooine's history, then make sure to check out this video. Despite the RAKATA's seemingly iron grip over the galaxy, they were in fact losing their power, and even their very connection to the Force. The RAKATA soon turned their attention to the Force-rich world of Tython in a bid to find the last remaining Infinity Gate of the Quar, hoping this could reverse their declining connection to the Force. The Jedi were not the powerful and united civilization they had once been. The non-Force sensitives had been banished from Tython and soon began demanding greater autonomy. This eventually resulted in the Despot Wars. Although the Jedi were ultimately victorious, their unshaken confidence in themselves was now broken. Despite the Jedi's weakened state, they managed to repel the RAKATA and their flesh raider forces. Not long after, the Jedi had formed an alliance with the armies of the settled worlds of the Tython systems, their former enemies from the Despot War. Force sabers, the RAKATA's dark side weapons, were also used by the Order for the first time. Little did they know this would have huge consequences for the fate of the Jedi. After a year of intense fighting, the war ended in a Jedi victory. Following their leader's defeat, the RAKATA turned on each other and fled. However, the RAKATAn invasion would profoundly affect the Jedi, and soon they split into two factions. The followers of the light believed that the Force sabers should be done away with, but the Darksiders saw the use of Force sabers as essential. Both sides eventually clashed in an event known as the Force Wars. This war caused severe imbalances in the Force, disrupting the fragile ecosystem of Tython. What remained of the Darkside Jedi fled to the Rim, where they were eventually hunted down. The light side members of the Jedi eventually fled to Ossus, where they would reform themselves into the Jedi Order. At the same time in the RAKATAn Infinite Empire, their grip on power was quickly crumbling. The semi-sentient Star Forge began feasting off the aggressive inclinations of its RAKATAn masters and creating dark side energies that further warped the minds of those who built it. After millennia of galactic supremacy, the Infinite Empire began to crumble. Massive slave uprisings erupted across the Empire. Concurrently, there was a civil war amongst the RAKATAn elite. The RAKATA, already weakened by this conflict, were abruptly stricken by a terrible plague in 25,200 BBY. Many RAKATA would die, but, worst of all, the illness greatly accelerated the declining force sensitivity of the species. As the RAKATA's capacity to manipulate their own technology diminished, they were compelled to accept the use of far inferior technology in order to survive. Slave worlds began to successfully oust their RAKATAn overlords, and this is when the Infinite Empire began to truly fall apart. All that the decimated RAKATA could do was abandon their conquests and go back to the safety of their homeworld. But it only got worse for the RAKATA. A horrific civil war broke out on their homeworld as several groups vied for control of what remained of their once great empire, resulting in the annihilation of their cities and the transformation of their planet's surface into a series of islands. Almost all RAKATA were exterminated as a result of this war. Only a small group, known as the Elders, were able to recollect the actual history of their people and the events that led to their downfall. In almost no time at all, the once mighty Infinite Empire was no more. In its place was a gargantuan power vacuum. Of course, this would soon be filled by brutal warlords and savage generals. However, the fall of the Infinite Empire would also eventually lead to a new era of peace and freedom. Tune in next week where we will discuss the rise of the Hutt Empire, Zim the Despot, as well as the Republic.